Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagajatam Sahagana Raghunatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parirana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Pada Sagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vitamscha. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Manchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaham. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavari Paschatra Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, everyone. So, welcome to our Nectar of Devotion study. So today we'll be discussing chapter 1, the first part of chapter 1. So last week we discussed this most important verse in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in which Srila Rupa Goswami has completely and clearly defined the definition of pure devotional service. And this is the Bij mantra, the seed mantra for the whole Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. From this, everything else is built upon. And so Srila Rupa Goswami explained and defined pure devotional service with its primary characteristics and its secondary characteristics. The secondary characteristics being that it is free from all desires. It is free from any of the monistic philosophy or fruitive results. And pure devotional service is favorable for Krishna, performed continuously following in the footsteps of the previous acharyas. So we discussed this very complete and precise definition. And the importance of this is to make us and help us understand what is pure devotional service and what is not pure devotional service. Because everything that we're going to speak about from here forward is going to be in the realm of pure bhakti. So like today, we'll be discussing these characteristics awarded to the practitioner of pure devotional service. And then we'll talk about the qualifications of pure devotional service and the various aspects of it. So it's all within this realm of Anyabhilashita Shunyam, Jnanakamari Navritam, Anukulyena Krishna Anushilanam, Bhaktir Uttama. So that was last week's discussion. So now in chapter 1, we're going to get a glimpse into the tremendous power of pure devotional service. Pure devotional service is so extraordinary. And Srila Rupa Goswami is establishing right in chapter 1 what the practitioner of pure devotional service will gain. And then he'll explain how to achieve it. But first he's establishing here in this chapter 1, what are the characteristics that are awarded to the practitioner of pure devotional service. And we know pure devotional service means no desires, no ulterior motives, only desiring to please Krishna. And so how that manifests is of question. How one can have these no desires. So pure devotional service, it's so amazing and powerful that the desires actually dissipate from the practitioner. And why does a practitioner have no desires? Sometimes we wonder, if I render all my service to Krishna, what about my happiness? What about my feelings? What am I going to get? Sometimes it can be very subtle. When we render devotional service, there's some concern or care for our own self-being. But in Anyabhilashita Shunyam, Rupa Goswami is saying no desires, not even for one's own happiness. So, in the first paragraph of the Nectar of Devotion, just chapter 1, Srila Prabhupada gives a quote I just wanted to read. So in Srimad Bhagavatam, 3rd canto, 29th chapter, verses 12 and 13, Srila Kapiladev, while instructing his mother, has given the following characteristics of pure devotional service. Quote, "My dear mother, those who are my pure devotees and who have no desire for material benefit or philosophical speculation have their minds so much engaged in my service that they are never interested in asking me for anything except to be engaged in that service. They do not even beg to live in my abode with me." It's a very wonderful way that we're opening this Nectar of Devotion, chapter 1, with this great verse, which says that one doesn't even ask Krishna to live in his abode, to go back home to Godhead. But they only ask that they may remain in service. And so why is that the case? And Srila Rupa Goswami is guiding us that pure devotional service, it's so sweet that the service itself is what is satisfying. The practice of pure devotional service is satisfying. It is not the result. Like, for example, when I go to work in the office, the work itself is not satisfying. It is the paycheck that comes. Maybe there's some satisfaction in the work, but the ultimate is the actual result that comes. But pure devotional service is so sweet that the service itself is so completely satisfying that there's no interest in asking for anything else. There's nothing else left. We have a desire when there is something we are lacking, right? Desires manifest when there's something we are missing. But pure devotional service is so complete and so satisfying that one doesn't have anything to ask. They are completely satiated. And that is the beauty of this pure devotional service. And that's what's amazing, is that this complete satisfaction occurs in the rendering of the service. And that's what makes one free from all these desires. The service itself is sufficient to bring about complete satisfaction. Imagine loving our job so much that we would go to work without even wanting to be paid. Just the act of going into the office was so sweet that we didn't even want a paycheck. It's inconceivable to us because that is in the material realm. But in pure devotional service, it is the service itself that is the reward. And so what the devotee prays for? Krishna, just allow me to serve you, because that is which is so completely satisfying. So much so that in pure devotional service, one doesn't even desire liberation, to live in his abode, as Kapila Deva is speaking to his mother Devahuti in this verse. Don't even want to go back to Godhead? No, the only desire is to remain in service, because that, again, is what is the source of sweetness. So when one desires to go back to Godhead, The desire to go back to Godhead is so that one may render service to Krishna. Because it is not the destination that is sweet. It is the opportunity to render service that is sweet. And so this is kind of the foundational understanding of this. Right? And in the second and third paragraph, Srila Prabhupada begins to explain these 5 types of liberations. And we'll see how in Bhava Bhakti that this liberation is moksha lagutakrit. It becomes insignificant. These 5 types of liberation, sayujya, samipya, sarupya, sharsti, and salokya. To become one with Krishna. To live very close to Him. To have the same form or same opulences. Or live in the same planet. These 5 types of liberation are uninteresting to the practitioner of pure devotional service. Because again, the rendering of the service is so sweet. No other desire can enter the consciousness of the pure devotee. They'll trade nothing for it. And so this is the great potency and power and sweetness of pure devotional service. Imagine what it'll be like when we can experience this. So this is the foundation. So now Rupa Goswami goes on to explain now that there are 3 stages of bhakti. We start with sadhana bhakti. And we'll spend the first almost 15 chapters discussing sadhana bhakti. Then, from there, one matures into bhava bhakti. This is devotional service in ecstasy. And from bhava bhakti, it matures into prema bhakti. So there are these 3 stages of bhakti. Sadhana bhakti, bhava bhakti, prema bhakti. And we'll see there are some subdivisions within sadhana bhakti that we'll just be discussing in the coming weeks. We'll set that aside for now. But there are 6 characteristics that are awarded to the practitioner of pure devotional service. There are 2 in each stage. And so the first 2 are Kleshagni and Shubhada. And that's what we'll discuss today. That these 2 characteristics are awarded to one in sadhana bhakti. Kleshagni means klesha is distress. And Agni means fire. The distresses, the sufferings are burnt to ashes. One becomes free from all suffering. Pure devotional service brings about immediate relief from the material distresses. So this is the first characteristic award, and we'll spend quite a bit of time today discussing that. And the second is Shubhada. It is the beginning of all auspiciousness. Then next week we'll discuss the 2 characteristics provided within Bhava Bhakti, this moksha lagutakrit, which means that the happiness from Bhava Bhakti is so extraordinary that the concept of liberation seems very insignificant, to the point that one becomes, almost derides the concept of liberation. The thing that the yogis and the tapasvis are endeavoring so intensely for, the practitioner of pure devotional service finds it very insignificant because the happiness from Bhava Bhakti is so high, so extraordinary. And we'll talk about this, the concept of liberation. The concept of becoming free is not what gives happiness. Like the prisoner, when he's released from jail, it is not that he's free from jail that is giving happiness. It's the opportunity to perform activities that were previously not available to him that is giving happiness. Oh, now I can go to the beach and I can eat pizza and watch TV. That is the source of happiness, not being free from the jail. So liberation is not the source of happiness. It's the activities that one may perform in the liberated state that is the source of happiness. And that is what the pure devotional service, one in pure devotional service comes to understand. And Sudarlabha will understand it is very rare to achieve this Bhava Bhakti stage. And why, we'll discuss next week. And then the final two characteristics in Prema Bhakti, Sandhanananda Visheshatma. One immediately, automatically comes into transcendental pleasure, this intense, condensed happiness, so much happiness. And one is able to even attract Krishna. So anyways, these are the 6 characteristics, and we'll discuss the first 2 today that are awarded in the practice of sadhana bhakti. Okay? So let's now move into this first characteristic, kleshagni, which means immediate relief from all material distresses. So pure devotional service will burn away like a fire all the distresses of the material world. So the practitioner becomes free from all the distresses. And this is one of the great benedictions of practicing pure devotional service. How many of us want to be free from all the distresses in the material world? Yeah. Of course, the pure devotional service does not have that desire. But when one does not have that desire, that's what one achieves. It is the counterintuitive means. You know, the more we want happiness, the less we get it. The more we render service to Krishna without the desire, actually the more we enjoy. So there are 3 causes of our suffering. And the 3 causes are papam, bijam, and avidya. These are the 3 causes of our suffering. And avidya is the root cause of our suffering. We'll discuss that one last. But we'll discuss papam first, which is the sinful activities. So the 3 causes are sinful activities, the sinful desires, and our ignorance. These 3 contribute to our suffering. So when I am suffering, oh, this is not going so well, ouch, I can look to these 3 things to understand the cause of my suffering. There is no other cause. No other cause. This is it. And all of society is working to try to stop suffering. But only by looking at these 3 things can we actually stop suffering. So bhakti is unique in that it is the only means to remove these 3 sources of suffering. Even other spiritual practices like these prayaschitta purificatory practices, taking bath in a holy river, performing some yajna, that may remove some sinful reactions, but it will not remove the avidya, bijam, and papam, which is the ultimate causes of our suffering. So these other practices may give us some temporary relief, but only bhakti, pure bhakti, can remove these 3 root causes of suffering. So, and the importance of this is, if I know the cause of it, then I have some hope to solve it. If I know the cause of the disease in my body, then I can work to remediate it. So Rupa Goswami is giving us, here it is. This is what is causing your suffering. Now let's go solve it. Right? So let's dig into each of these now, each of these 3 in great detail. This section of Nectar Devotion is the most technical. It's dense and technical, but read this a couple of times, read the waves of devotion, and it will become clear. But I warn you, it is a little technical, but it's very, very important. So we have some diagrams here to help us guide us through the process, but it is very, very important. So the first thing here is sinful activity, papam. This is the first cause of our suffering. And when we sin, there are two reactions. There is the manifest or the prarabdha reaction, the mature fruit, and there is the aparabdha, the unmanifest reaction. Now, technically speaking, there is a layer in between this, which is the sinful activity creates two reactions. Both are aparabdha, unmanifest, and the one aparabdha results in prarabdha, manifest. So just to simplify, we can understand that when we sin, there is a manifest reaction and there is an unmanifest reaction. Okay? So what is the manifest reaction is the actual suffering, the direct suffering. And the unmanifest is it leads to this increase in sinful reaction, sinful proclivity, desire, and ultimate activity. And we'll come back to this very difficult cycle to break in a moment. Right? And in the Waves of Devotion, Maharaj gives this, example of this manifest and unmanifest reaction. That one is engaging in sex life, there's direct and physical harm that's experienced, but it also increases the desire to perform additional or more such activity. So there's the immediate reaction, but there's also the increase in desire, which then leads to more actions. So these sinful activity leads to both occurring, prarabdha and aparabdha. Okay. So now just a little bit more detail on prarabdha is that this is the manifest results of our past sinful life. So our body is the representation of what past sins we have done. The chronic diseases we may have, enduring legal difficulties, a low birth. These are exhibitions. This is the mature fruit of our past sins. And pure devotional service is so strong that even these manifest reactions can be overcome. Right? So strong that even a low birth or a not very beautiful face or difficulties, even one in that situation can practice pure devotional service and overcome them. But other practices, these yagyas and certain things, they must be performed by, certain brahmanas who are born of a certain category. But bhakti, pure bhakti is available, as we'll see in a couple chapters, available to anybody. So this is the potency of devotional service. And so the prarabdha reactions are the manifest, and it's like the potencies compared to a disease. When a disease is caught early before the symptoms arise, then it is easier to eradicate the disease. But once the symptoms are manifest, cancer is very advanced, the tumors are there, then it becomes very difficult to solve. But bhakti is so powerful that even when the symptoms are manifest, fully exhibited, it can be eradicated. And that is the power of devotional service. So the aparabdha reactions, these unmanifest reactions, these are reactions that are going to be fructified in the future. Like a seed eventually will become a fruit. Like that, the aparabdha reactions, they're there, they're stored, but they're not yet manifest. They're waiting for us to come. Right? And the example we see in Nectar Devotion is that, a criminal, when he commits a crime, the crime has been committed, but the judgment and the punishment is still coming. Once the court, goes through the process of validating the crime, then the punishment will come. So like that is we have committed the sin, but the reaction is still coming. That is these aparabdha reactions. Okay? So it's like with a disease state. I don't yet have the symptoms, but I have the disease. but the symptoms are still developing within the body. Like that, this is the unmanifest reactions. Okay? So sinful activity leads to two reactions, aparabdha and parabdha. Now, this cycle of unmanifest reactions creates extreme danger. We should put lots of caution. Because what happens is it perpetuates a cycle of suffering. And this cycle, this perpetual cycle, becomes very difficult to break. And so we have to understand how these things build upon each other. It's just like a boulder. If I start rolling it down the hill and you're at the middle of the hill, how easy is it to stop that boulder from rolling down the hill? You'll get crushed and run over. Like that, once this cycle of sin starts, it's very hard to break. So let's understand how this cycle starts, right? And then we'll understand how to break it. Okay? So when we perform sinful activity, we know there is a reaction, this parabdha reaction. And then what is the result? Suffering. Sin leads to suffering. That piece we understand from our prior studies probably very clearly. Action equals reaction, right? But there's a secondary piece through this parabdha reactions that makes this even more dangerous and more difficult. And that's what Srila Rupa Goswami is guiding us on here. Is that when we perform sinful activities, the aparabdha reactions manifest. And those aparabdha reactions result in this proclivity, this kutam, this, I can say, this potential to become sinful. It increases. So the aparabdha reaction increases our proclivity, our tendency to sin. We haven't sinned yet, but our tendency to sin is now increased. And this is very, very deeply rooted, very deeply into our nature. And that tendency to sin then matures into actual desires, specific desires to sin. So I have a nature, that nature leads to certain desires. I haven't sinned yet, but those desires are there. And when the desires come, then I actually leads to papam, the actual action of sin. And what happens when I sin? Again, manifest reactions and suffering, but also increased aparabdha reactions, which increases my nature to sin, which increases my desires to sin, which increases my sinful activities, which shall I continue? This goes on and on in a cycle. And then we see endless suffering. Right? And this is the danger of engaging in sinful life. It is not just the reactions that are there, but it's the increase in tendency in nature to sin, the increase in desires that then fuel more sinful activities. And it's just like a criminal. You know, when they steal once, are they satisfied? No. They want to steal more and bigger and bigger and bigger. And this is the nature of this cycle. You know, and kind of an example of this maturing of aparabdha reactions. You know, one may be born, you know, and to be destined to be a thief based on one's past karma. You know, the child born as a toddler is not yet a thief, but there's a nature of that child to be a thief. And that slowly matures, and as that person grows, now the specific desires, oh, I shall steal this toy. I shall steal this piece of bubble gum. And that desire slowly matures into the actual action of stealing. And then we see, as that person grows, that nature to steal intensifies. And I shall steal, the answers to this test. I shall steal, some money from my mother. And again, it continues. And then robberies to banks and like this. So we can see how these aparabdha reactions manifest into greater and greater sins, all of which results in more and more suffering. So it creates an eternal life of sinning and suffering, sinning and suffering, sinning and suffering. It's a never-ending cycle. So we must find a way with the hammer to break this cycle, to shatter it into pieces. So this is the problem that we must address. And the practitioner of pure devotional service will see becomes free from this root cause of suffering. Because pure devotional service, it attacks all four of these. That the pure devotional service not only eliminates our sinful reactions, the manifest reactions, just like bathing in the Ganges, you can become free from your reactions. But by bathing in the Ganges, what you don't become free from is this aparabdha, kutam, and bijam. But pure devotional service, it first starts to attack our aparabdha reactions. It starts to reduce and eliminate those. When those become eliminated, then our tendency to sin, this proclivity, is reduced. And that is gone. When that tendency to sin is reduced, then the desires in the heart to sin also dissipate. And what happens when there are no desires in the heart to sin? We don't sin anymore. And when there are no sinful activities, then there are no more manifest reactions and there is no more suffering. So the pure devotional service, it's so powerful that it can consume huge amounts of aparabdha reactions. Just like a fire can consume huge amounts of fuel. Prabhupada uses this example in the purport. The immense power of pure devotional service is that it can burn to ashes these aparabdha reactions. And this is the great potency of pure devotional service. No other practice can do this. And that's why Srila Prabhupada says that one engaged in pure devotional service is fully purified, free from all contaminations of sinful activities. Why? Because this cycle is now being broken. Of course, once we start pure devotional service, it doesn't mean that immediately there'll be no more reactions coming. And Prabhupada used to give the example of a fan. When it is spinning, if you unplug the fan continues to spin, but it is starting to slow down and slow down. And eventually, it will stop. So like that, when we begin pure devotional service, we have unplugged this cycle of adding more. And slowly, but assuredly, these things will be dissipated and that fan of suffering will stop. So this is the great potency of bhakti. It attacks our kutam and bijam and ultimately our papam and thus our suffering. And the final reactions to go is our parabdha, the manifest reaction. And the ultimate reaction of our sinful life is this body. I have this body because of some past sin. So we don't want our parabdha reactions to go too quickly. Otherwise we'll not purify. So that is why first these aparabdha reactions through that. And ultimately, as one fully purifies, then one will rid themselves of the material body and regain the eternal spiritual body. Okay? So spending a lot of time on this just to make the point, and through repetition, hopefully it will resonate. It's important, yet technical, but very, very powerful. Now, the second of our causes of suffering, again, the first cause is papam. The second cause is bijam, this sinful desires, as we've been talking about. So, the papam is the immediate cause. When we sin, there's a reaction. But the secondary cause are the desires in the heart that lead to more suffering, more sinful activities. Right? So, pure devotional service, again, is the only thing that can stop us from sinning in the future. Right? So, like the elephant bath, other forms of purification, we sin, we atone. But once we have atoned from that sin, we go back to sinning again. Why? Because the bijam, the desires in the heart, have not been cleansed. I've been cleansed from the reaction, but not from the desires. You know, Srila Prabhupada gives the other example in the chapter 1 of curing the venereal disease. You know, from sex life, very, bad diseases come. And pain and suffering to become free from that disease is very strong. But as soon as one becomes free from that disease, one goes right back to sex life. And thus that disease comes back. Because of this, not purifying from that desire. So the pure devotional service, it attacks this bijam, this desire for sinful life. No other process will attack this. Just taking bath in the Ganges, one will not become free from this nature and desire, this kutam and bijam. Now, we talked about this cycle here. It's present. But how does it start? A cycle has to start somewhere. Right? What is the root cause? And this root cause is avidya. From our ignorance comes these sinful desires, which mature into sinful activities, which result in suffering and unmanifest prarabdha reactions, and so on and so forth. But the root cause is our ignorance. And ignorance of what? Our true identity. Who am I? As we forget we are eternal servants of Krishna, we then try to become servants of our senses. And from that, these desires manifest, and thus the cycle of suffering begins. Right? So, we must cure the ignorance of trying to be independent from Krishna to end this cycle of suffering. Because as soon as that ignorance hits, we enter this self-perpetuating cycle. So that is how it starts. And thus eliminating the ignorance is key to stopping our suffering. And thus Srila Prabhupada summarizes from the Padma Purana that pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness is the highest enlightenment. Note the word enlightenment. Opposite of ignorance. I'll read it again. Pure devotional service in Krishna consciousness is the highest enlightenment. And when such enlightenment is there, it is just like a blazing forest fire, killing all the inauspicious snakes of desires. So Srila Prabhupada comments that the blazing fire of Krishna consciousness is so strong that all the desires born out of ignorance are burned to ashes. So this bhakti, it brings about this enlightenment, knowledge that removes our avidya, our ignorance, and thus stops this cycle of sinning. So we must, again, in summary, 3 causes of suffering: this avidya, bijam, and papam. And all 3 are destroyed, vanquished, squashed, annihilated with pure devotional service. If we want to stop our suffering, this is the only means. Eradicating the sinful reactions alone will not work. We must attack the unmanifest reactions, get to the cause, the bijam and kutam, and uproot all of this, including our ignorance. So devotional service is the only means to attack these three. And then one gets permanent relief. Permanent relief from suffering as one exits that cycle. So it is pure devotional service. If we want permanent relief, get out our bead bag and sincere, intense, high-quality chanting and other practices of devotional service. And this is kleshagni. This is what is awarded to the pure devotee. This relief from all suffering, distress. And so what we discussed is how it happens. The details of exactly how one becomes free from the suffering. So it's, again, very technical, but in order to have some faith that it'll happen, it's helpful to understand the inner workings of how it works. And that is the benefit of taking this slightly technical journey, is to give us faith in this kleshagni, immediate relief from our suffering by practicing pure devotional service. Wow, if this is the case, who would not practice pure bhakti? Okay, now we'll discuss the second characteristic briefly. We'll continue the discussion of the second characteristic next week as well. But we'll just conclude the second characteristic, which is all auspiciousness, the subhadda characteristic. So this characteristic, they're related with kleshagni. So as the material distresses, suffering is being dissipated, this all auspiciousness emerges. Just like as darkness is dissipating by lightness, one translates the other. Similarly, suffering reduces and all auspiciousness emerges. So they're related. And these two characteristics are fully manifest when one has reached the nishta stage. So remember the 9 steps from Shraddha to Prema. When one has become free from all anarthas and becomes steady in their sadhana bhakti, that is when these two become fully manifest. Okay? So they may become partially manifest in earlier stages. We may be seeing them now. I used to suffer from so many things, depression and this and that, and now I'm getting less suffering. Okay? And I'm maybe beginning to see some of these auspiciousness categories we will discuss now. But understand they become fully manifest at the stage of nishta. Once all of our anarthas are gone, then we'll see this completely. And another way to think about it is that until we are not steady in our sadhana, these characteristics will not be fully manifested. So once we become fully steady in our sadhana bhakti, then these will become fully manifested. So if we are wondering, how come I'm not completely free of my suffering? It's because we are not nishta yet. So become nishta, and that'll happen. Okay? So now the 4 aspects of all auspiciousness. The first is it is beneficial for everyone. It is auspicious. It benefits everyone. Devotional service is a blessing to the world. It is the greatest welfare activity one can do. It benefits not only the practitioner, but everyone around. You know, United Nations, Prabhupada comments about. It is trying to benefit everybody. But it is simply an exploitation of some stronger nations against the weaker nations. It is not truly united in goal. And all these international organizations, the World Health Organization, they cannot benefit everybody. There's winners and losers. But pure devotional service, the practitioner, actually benefits everyone. Only devotional service is universal. Because, again, that suffering is universal. Second, is it attracts everyone. Because the pure devotee will manifest these qualities we'll talk about in a minute, it is attractive to everyone. one becomes very kind, loving, no motive, no ego, that becomes attractive. And as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu showed in his pastimes in the Jharikanda forest, even the animals become attracted to devotional service. Third is that this third aspect of all auspiciousness is that it produces good qualities. Prabhupada gives a nice comment that, getting the high degrees in university, it doesn't produce the good qualities of avoiding illicit sex, gambling, meat eating, intoxication. But a devotee very quickly can become free from these bad activities. Forget about spiritual look. These are socially, bad things. And one becomes free from them. So these good qualities emerge in the practitioner of a pure devotee. And we should also understand someone who is not a devotee cannot have these good qualities. This tolerance and forgiveness and compassion, humbleness. You can try to have it for short periods of time, but without devotional service, they'll not last, because our sinful desires will ultimately overtake our temporary means to try to become tolerant or humble or compassionate. So the Harvard MBAs and IIT degrees, they cannot teach us to acquire these good qualities. It is the pure devotional service that brings about these good qualities. And finally, superior happiness. That one becomes so content and happy as we open this discussion by the practice of bhakti that even one has no other desires. So when one practices pure devotional service, one is awarded this characteristic also of superior happiness. So we'll discuss this in more detail next week, this last aspect of superior happiness. It's a little bit more involved, and so in the interest of time, we'll end there. But the conclusion of this section is that pure devotional service only can bring about these four auspicious characteristics to benefit everyone, attract everyone, these good qualities, and this superior happiness. And pure devotional service can bring immediate relief to our suffering, this kleshagni. So that is what's awarded to the practitioner of sadhana bhakti. Next week, we'll just finish up this discussion of superior happiness, and then we'll discuss the other four characteristics awarded to the practitioner of bhava bhakti and prema bhakti. And we'll conclude chapter 1. So any comments or questions or discussions?
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dhanva Pranam. Very nice lecture. I have a question which I kind of did not understand how to differentiate between these two. One is that bijam, which is a desire in a heart that leads to the sinful activity, and the other one which you had talked was the aprabdha reaction, like that is sinful proclivity, right?
Yes.
So how do we differentiate between bijam and then sinful proclivity?
Yeah. So the example is that there is a nature to be sinful, that is the bijam. There's a proclivity to sin, but there's not a specific desire that I want to do this sin. So I have a nature to be a thief, as an example. Okay? But I don't have a desire to steal money yet. So the nature is the kutam, this proclivity, this tendency to be a thief. And that matures into bijam. That nature matures into specific desires. And then the specific desires mature into the actual action of stealing. So actually, the reaction of sin doesn't occur until the action has occurred. If we stopped it at bijam even, we'd be okay. But what happens is these things mature. So it starts as a aparabdha, unmanifest, that matures or fuels the proclivity, the tendency. That tendency matures into the specific desire. That specific desire matures into the action. So that's how they are kind of, and you can, the other way to think about it, Prabhupada uses the example of like a seed. You know, you plant a seed that is like the unmanifest, and then it sprouts. That is like the kutam. And then the actual, plant emerges. And then the fruit. So there are like, it's a maturing stage. So it's okay?
I mean, aprabdha is leading to bijam, right? You said.
No, aparabdha. Yeah, you can see on the screen. So this aparabdha leads to kutam.
Kutam is same as bijam?
No, they are different. So, yeah, again, the nature is first. The nature to sin, the proclivity, the tendency to sin is first. That's kutam. Then that matures into bijam, specific desires.
Okay.
Right? So they're sequential in a circle. They're not, they lead to two different things. One leads to, so aparabdha leads to kutam, which leads to bijam, which leads to papam. It's okay?
Yeah, I think I'll just go through it one more time and if I have questions.
Yeah, it takes a couple of reads to kind of clarify and organize these different terms. So don't initially get lost in the detail of the terms. First, understand the general concept that, I have these tendencies to be sinful that matures into specific desires to perform sins, which then matures into the actual activity of sin. So understand that general concept first, then you can apply the terms to each of those stages in the concept.
Yeah, that I understood. The tendency to sin is the beginning.
That's kutam.
Right?
That's kutam.
Okay, that's the kutam. And then that leads to the desire.
That's bijam. Yep. So you've understood the sequence. Now just where the terms go. Yep. So that tendency is kutam. The desires is bijam.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Yes.
Prabhuji, the manifest reaction, right? So is that manifest reaction is like something you talked about having, from the previous or the past life sin, that currently like whichever body we are or like whichever birth we are, all those are already a manifested reaction, correct, bro?
Yeah, just one kind of minor clarification. It doesn't necessarily have to be from past life. It could be from something we did earlier that is now manifest. So our body is clearly from past life because that's fixed, right? But then maybe I get the flu. Well, that is a suffering of the body. That is a manifest reaction to some prior sin. Why do I suffer the flu? Because I did something previously, some papam, that is now leading to the manifestation of the flu, which leads to suffering. So it's not exactly prior life, but prior action.
Okay, so it could be either of that.
Yes, it could be either prior life or prior. So like my body, that's clearly an indication of my past life sins, right? Because that's kind of fixed. I'm born in this age, I have this color, I have this look, I have this features. But that's only one aspect of parabdha, is my body. All the different, reactions and different experiences I have, those are also parabdha reactions, right?
Okay. I was trying to understand the difference here between manifested and manifested. So, like born in lower birth or like with a body that is like physically challenged body. All those are like could be from the past life. That's why it is manifest action.
Correct.
Also, it could be something that I know that like I'm doing sin, so I'm doing it. So that's why it's manifested action.
It's not the knowing; it's just the actual doing of sin, right? So the result of suffering comes from papam, the actual action of sin. Now, when I did it doesn't matter, but we know at some point in the past.
So that's where like I am confused, bro.
Okay.
So the past karma and currently like we are going through is not because of something that we did right now, but like something that we do right now could also be like I was assuming that the manifested reaction is something that we do and then we get it.
No, the reaction again is a result of the activity. Right?
Okay.
So the reaction is the result of activity. Now, what we do, if I do some good activities, I can get a good result. But if I do a bad activity, that's what results in the reaction. So whatever I'm experiencing is from past actions. Now, whatever I'm doing today is going to create future reactions. And when that reaction is experienced, it's parabdha. But in the meantime, there's the aparabdha that's being also perpetuated. There is a dual effect of that sinful activity. So let's just take an example. Today I'm going to, slit the throat of an animal. That's papam, right? So at some point, the manifest reaction for that activity is coming. But also, there is the aparabdha reaction from that slitting the throat that is now increasing my kutam, my tendency to do these things, and then increasing the desire to do more, and it'll lead again to the same activity maybe tomorrow. And like that, it continues. But the reaction still may be coming manifest at some point. And when I then, let's say, I lose my left arm. Okay, now that's the manifest reaction of me slitting the throat of yesterday's animal. We don't know exactly which is which, but just as an example, right? So now I lost my arm. That's a parabdha reaction that was born out of the papam of slitting the throat of the animal the day before. Again, just as an example. Does that help clarify?
Yes, bro.
Okay.